Okay, here we go. Stand by. 3, 2, 1.
The thinking atheist. It's not a person. It's a symbol. An idea.
The population of atheists in this country is going through the roof.
Rejecting faith. Pursuing knowledge. Challenging the sacred.
If I tell the truth, it's because I tell the truth. Not because I put my hand on a book and made a wish.
And working together for a more rational world.
Take the risk of thinking for yourself. Much more happiness, truth, beauty, and wisdom will come to you that way.
Assume nothing. Question everything. And start thinking. This is the Thinking Atheist Podcast. Hosted by Seth Andrews.
Today we're talking about talking. The power of language, the language that we use every day. It's kind of a billboard about ourselves, our own identity. It can tell people where we're from, our family history, our age, what our value system is. I don't just mean words either. I mean cadence and pronunciation and sentence structure. The Great Courses Plus has a whole lecture series on this that goes deep into the power of the spoken word. It's taught by Dr. Valerie Fridland. It's called Language and Society, What Your Speech Says About You. And so as we talk today on the show about conversations about conversations, this series can help us better understand how our vowels and consonants can reveal other people to us and also reveal us to other people. Language and Society, it's just one of thousands of offerings at the Great Courses Plus, taught by experts in their respective fields, streaming anytime, anywhere, including on the Great Courses Plus app. And right now you can get 2 full weeks. 2 weeks of unlimited access to everything. I'd love for you to try the Great Courses Plus. Get started with a free trial, unlimited access with my special URL, thegreatcoursesplus.com/Seth. That's 14 days to learn anything you want for free. So sign up now. Remember, thegreatcoursesplus.com/Seth. So I'm a big Jason Bateman fan. Okay, and it's funny because the guy has totally reinvented himself. Jason Bateman used to be just the goofball kid. He was the color commentator in Dodgeball, right? He was always just funny. And I never took him all that seriously. And I remember in the ads for the Netflix series Ozark, which is a terrific series, by the way, but it's a dark little series. And they cast Jason Bateman as the lead character. And I thought, what? Jason Bateman? And he's amazing. And he's perfect. And he's also turned out to be like a brilliant director. He was one of the stars of, and he directed at least 1 or if not 2 episodes of the HBO miniseries The Outsider, which was another dark little journey. And he just seems wicked smart and clever, and I've become a fan, okay? Well, I just saw that he is co-host of a podcast called Smartless, and Sam Harris was one of their guests. Well, Jason Bateman, Sam Harris in the same conversation. Okay, I'm totally in. And I would encourage you to look it up because, love Sam Harris or hate Sam Harris. And I appreciate his work. His books were there for me when I was starting to come out of my own faith. And so I've always had that kind of connection to Sam Harris. But he was talking about how of all of the ideologies and philosophies and all the subject matter that humankind has approached, religion remains the one subject where someone can proudly look at you and say, no matter what new evidence you present, no matter what you say, I'll never change my mind. Go to somebody with any other piece of information that's not directly linked to their identity. Just a piece of trivia. Hey, did you know that the 18th century Queen of France, Marie Antoinette, never actually said, let them eat cake? That famous line. She never actually said that. Historians, they dug through and they say there's just nothing to support it. Wow, that's fascinating. I always assumed that Marie Antoinette always said that. Thanks for the update. I appreciate it. Did you know that it's a myth that we only use 10% of our brains at a time? We were always told about the wasted potential. We only use 10% of our brains at any given time. That's actually not true. They measured the brain, and most of our brain is active most of the time. Wow. I never knew that. That's interesting science. Hey, dogs are supposed to have only black and white vision. Well, that's not actually true. Dogs see a spectrum of color. They can differentiate between many colors. Whoa, I'm actually relieved. I always felt bad for my dog only seeing in black and white. They can see some color? That's wonderful. Did you know the Declaration of Independence wasn't actually signed on the 4th of July? They signed that sucker in August the 2nd. Of 1776. Oh, that's bizarre. I'm used to shooting off fireworks and having hot dogs to celebrate Independence Day on July 4th. You're telling me they didn't sign the document till the next month? Wow, I'll remember that. The next time we have our July 4th get-together, I'll tell my friends. They'll find that really interesting. Now, these same people that you've been talking to for the last 2 minutes about the other stuff, you go to them and you say, hey, planet scientists, geologists, etc., experts in their fields on pretty much every continent on the planet have examined the planet. And they've checked out the layers of sediment and the things found in the sediments in the Earth's crust. And they not only revealed that there's no evidence to believe that Noah's flood actually happened, in the book of Genesis chapter 6, the entire planet covered in water. Not only have they said that there's no evidence for it, they say that all of the evidence refutes it. No global flood ever happened. The Bible is wrong about that. And this same person who was so eager to hear all the other information just plants their feet and squares their shoulders and stiffens their spine and says, I don't care what you say. You know what? I don't even care what the geologists say. They can dig all day. It doesn't make any difference to me. I believe the Bible. There's a point of pride in not changing a religious position when there was pride in changing all of the other positions. I think this is mostly indigenous to religion. I think conspiracy theories also fall into this category. We see it quite a bit with everything from the anti-vaxxer. Well, the CDC has refuted all claims that vaccines cause autism. Oh, yeah? That sounds like something Big Pharma would want you to think. There's no evidence that 9/11 was an inside job put together by George W. Bush and a blood for oil scheme with controlled demolitions and thermite doesn't melt steel beams and all these. Well, actually, scientists have gone through, we have reverse engineered 9/11, and it was not an inside job or a controlled demolition. Well, you know what? That sounds just like something the government would want you to think. You know what I'm saying? You ever see that documentary on Netflix about the flat earthers? It's called Behind the Curve. So these flat earthers who hold conventions and have clubs and gatherings and whatnot, they decide they're going to set up a series of experiments to prove that the earth is, in fact, flat. The problem is that time after time, their experiments fail. The experiments reveal that the earth is actually a sphere. Instead of updating their position, they blame the experiment. And they say, well, you know what? We need to alter the test so that it will produce the result that we are looking for. I mean, they actually say this, or an incarnation of this, in the documentary. So if you put an astrophysicist in the same room with a flat earther, would he be able to reason that flat earther out of their unreasonable position? This is the kind of question we are pondering today. We're going to get into some brain science. How does this machine of the brain even assimilate and process ideas? How are beliefs formed and protected? We're going to talk about that. I've got several activists coming up to talk about their perspectives. Going to do a little street epistemology. By the way, epistemology is the study of knowledge. Like, how do we come to know the things that we think we know? And street epistemology is where we get to go out and interact with the world around us and essentially ask our fellow human beings, well, how do you know that? How did you come to that knowledge? What are your processes? So we're going to get into some useful stuff when it comes to engaging people who hold unreasonable ideas. Right now, we'll start the conversation by going to the phones. 760, who's this?
Hi, Seth. This is Jack.
What are your thoughts today?
Well, before I get started, can I say a massive thank you for the work that you do? It's been really helpful in my journey out.
Thank you.
I didn't start listening until after I left the faith. But, the guests that you've had, the perspectives you've shared, and the fairness, you're just going on something that completely proves my point here. You're not calling religious people stupid. You're not calling them crazy or anything. Things like this, it really just is helping me rebuild after the religious mess, so to speak. So, again, I want to send a massive appreciation to you.
That's huge.
But anyway.
Thank you. Do you find yourself trying to discover who you are? I mean, once you walked out, are you having
yeah.
Who exactly am I? What is my identity? What's my value system? Is that going on in your head right now?
Hey, I'll do you one better, Seth. I just finished Dr. Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. And because, you realize that when you're in a fundamentalist religion and they're telling you this is what life is, this is what you are, this is what the world is, this is what other people are, then you're like, okay, well, that's what it is. But when you leave, you're like, well, shit, I got to figure out all this other stuff on my own. And I'm doing better, I'm establishing things with some philosophy, with science, with other stuff. But it's an ongoing process because I know that I'll never get complete 100% answers at the end of it, but it's still a fun journey and I'm still learning more than I knew before. So, but yeah, it is kind of a process of discovering what my values are and nailing them down.
Were you reasoned out of an unreasonable faith, or what's your perspective?
Well, yes and no. One of the things coming out of the faith has really emphasized for me is the fact that life is full of nuance. I don't think that there are black and white answers, except when there are. But,
I got you.
It's not an easy answer. It depends on the person and where they are in life. From my perspective, it was a gradual leaving. When I was, in my late childhood into my teen years, my dad would take me to an independent fundamentalist Baptist church. So, it's the trifecta of bad ideas, you know what I mean? But the point is, I had to kind of go out the back door, so to speak. I had to go through a more of a Joseph Prince, Joel Osteen kind of Christianity after fundamentalism didn't do it for me. And then I ended up in the Episcopal Church, which really was good for my progressive values. But, now I'm an atheist. And during that whole transition, I'm learning more about psychology, astronomy, history, the history of the church, anthropology. I'm learning all these different things, and it slowly builds up. And I don't ever really like to say, even though I probably did just earlier, that I left the faith. It's kind of like it left me. I didn't say, oh, God, you suck, you're gone, or I just reject this. It's almost like I turned around and he'd faded away because, the Jenga tower of belief, I'd taken out so many things over time. Oh, I don't agree with this. This doesn't make sense. This isn't in line with my values. And over time, it's well, what do I have left? There's nothing here. So in some cases, in mine, I guess you could say I was reasoned out of it, but not all at once. In other cases, I don't know if it's even advisable to do so, to try and reason someone else out. My dad, he's deep. I don't know if he's QAnon deep, but he's deep. He once told me that he believes that NASA found demons on the moon and that they're hiding it. I know.
I'm not laughing at you. I'm sorry. It was a reflex.
No, it's funny. No, it's totally funny. It's wacky. One time we were in a Chinese restaurant, and he said, hey, did you know that the ancient pictograms that represent the original Chinese, written language, they represent the Genesis story. Like the word for sin shows a garden and two people outside of that. Isn't that weird?
Wow.
And I'm like, no, it fucking doesn't.
Wow. When I was growing up, we were taught dumb stuff like that all-seeing eye on the top of the pyramid on the dollar bill. We were taught that that's like the eye of the devil. I mean, we had some weird conspiracy stuff like that. That's very QAnon-ish type of stuff.
Oh, yeah. Like I had an ex-girlfriend. This was years ago. On her Facebook, she put down, as her education, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. It's a bit of fun, like, oh, I went to Hogwarts, haha, fun little thing you do on social media. Well, my dad calls me up and says, well, son, the witchcraft is not a laughing matter. I know personally that it's a really big deal. And I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about?
I had relatives who wouldn't let their kids go to the Harry Potter films or read the books.
It's so insular, and I'm really happy to be gone from it. But when it comes to my dad, I've tried sitting down with him, and it's so difficult because I don't know if this is true with your family, but let's say you're talking about something completely innocuous. Oh, I'm listening to music, or oh, what's the weather like, or whatever, and they just completely throw something out of left field. Like, oh, did you know this prophecy or something? I don't know if you've ever experienced that, but it makes conversations with people who are deep in belief sometimes difficult. Trying to reason with my dad, it goes nowhere.
Well,
and
the reason I'm interjecting is because I'm curious. The phenomenon I've seen, I'm wondering if it happened with your dad, is a kind of backfire effect kicks in because he actually will double down, meaning that your conversation, it's not just that it wasn't productive, but it actually caused him to reinforce the walls.
Let me give you an example. I think you're onto something. One day I was, driving with him around town. He was having car trouble. I was driving around town. And at some point we got to talking about biology or something. I don't know how we got on the subject. And I said, oh, well, all men are born, or before they're born, they're women, because of the chromosomal thing. I'm not a biologist, but kind of generally what I'm talking about, like the way the chromosomes work. And then he said, oh, no, women came from men. It came from Adam's rib. And I'm like, no, it didn't. And we ended up having this kind of mini argument in the car. And at some point, he just shuts down and he says very calmly, and he's like, oh, I'll pray that the Lord will reveal his truth to you. And then I said, hold on, Pops. That tells me that you don't believe that I can make decisions on my own, that I can't figure out reality on my own, and that I'm to be pitied for it. And I said, personally, I find that offensive. And his response was, I don't care. And that's why I think, every situation's different. There's the nuance. There's where someone is in their life. There's so much at play. And every person, has to judge each situation differently. If you want to reach out to that family member, I don't think there are any easy answers. In my case, I've kind of just given up on them. Not because, I want to be mean or callous, but because I realize the juice ain't worth the squeeze.
All right, wait a minute. Hang on. I may like that phrase even better than religion and Jenga, which is a great analogy. Like playing the Jenga of religion is great, but the juice ain't worth the squeeze may be one of my favorites.
Hey, I didn't come up with that myself. I think it's a Southern expression. I don't know. But
the juice just ain't worth the squeeze.
It's not, though, because you really... you ask yourself, is it worth the arguments? And at this point, there's so much difference politically and religiously with him and I, and these things do come out of left field. It's pretty much to the point where I'm not full, no contact, but I'm having to put him at arm's length now, because especially with COVID, he's the kind of person who thinks it's not as big a deal. I mean, he still wears a mask, but it's frustrating. I feel like I've kind of lost a dad to stupid ideas. And I mean, there's other stuff involved with family too I won't get into, but it's just...
I got you.
It's tough, man.
I'd like to address a couple of things that you brought up, which are really, really good. And I want to talk a little bit about the Socratic method, which I knew we were going to get to, but you've given us a whole lot of really good stuff. I'm really sorry about your family. I think a lot of us can relate, but thank you for the kind words, man. It is hugely appreciated.
No, man, thank you for the work you do.
And, we'll just keep kicking and doing our best out there, okay?
Hell yeah. What else can we do?
See you later.
All right, bye-bye.
The juice ain't worth the squeeze. 847, hi, thanks for waiting. Who's this?
This is Joe. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and my expertise is with people who are going through substance use disorders, so like alcohol and drugs. And in there we have something called the stages of change, which is not a new concept, but we still use it. Basically, it's just for the clinician to kind of keep track with the client or patient where they're at. Like, are they admitting that they even need to change? Do they feel like they need to change? And this helps the person and the therapist to kind of meet in the middle and have a game plan. And sometimes that includes letting them walk away without changing. As a clinician, we have to step back and realize that a person is going to change when they are ready, and they're going to do the bulk of the work. And the most important thing that we can do as clinicians is to develop a therapeutic relationship with that person.
That must be frustrating for you if you're in a position where you're desperate to guide somebody into better ideas and they just sit there with arms folded and it's obvious they're not interested and not listening.
It can be tough because there is this sort of, we're trained to detach from an outcome, but it's hard to be outcome independent, really. You know, you really want what's best for the person. I can see in the chat some people are saying a therapist's job is to listen and the client will figure out. There's a lot of truth to that statement. You really have to help provide a person maybe another perspective if that's what they're needing, or just simply the tools to reduce harm or gain some benefit in the short time that you have with them.
At the very least, you give them a forum to be able to express any doubts or concerns or whatever without judgment.
Mm-hmm. I think, borrowing from my own experience, our backgrounds are actually kind of similar. I was in the Christian entertainment industry. I was touring. I was a performer. I was a singer. And I have to say that I still remember fondly some of those mountaintop experiences where faith was very deep and meaningful to me. And I kind of question, I can't think of any one particular time where I was reasoned out of that position. But through relationships that I developed and actually listening to other perspectives, eventually, gradually over time, I changed my mind or was able to be honest with myself and take stock of what I truly believed. It wasn't something that somebody did for me. Honestly, the biggest factor in a benefit to therapy is the clinical relationship, and that's what we've been taught as therapists. So I think that goes doubly so for your personal relationships. If you want a benefit to a relationship, it involves listening and meeting a person where they're at.
Good stuff, man. I'm glad you escaped. I appreciate your contribution to the show. Take care.
Yeah, you too.
All right, see you later. A friend and fellow activist, Anthony Magna Bosco, he is a street epistemologist. And he has had so many of these conversations, I just had to have him here. Anthony, how would you define street epistemology for the listeners just now hearing the term?
Oh, hey, Seth. Yeah, sure. The term street epistemology is a description, essentially, of a method for communicating with somebody where you're making your conversation partner the focus rather than you, and you're asking questions to figure out how they became so convinced that what they think is true is really true. And it's usually performed in a really casual, friendly way. It's a technique, I suppose, where you can really get to what's propping up the view and seeing if the reasons that they provide for thinking that it's true live up to their own standards. And it usually ends on good terms, too, where the person is grateful for the talk and usually wants to meet again.
Yeah, it's kind of cool to watch the videos. There's a lot of them out there. And I mean, a lot more than just Anthony. There's a whole team of street epistemologists. They go out with their webcams or phone cams or whatever, and they engage religious people. They use a lot of questions. Interestingly, they don't start by grabbing them by the shoulders and go, what the hell is wrong with you? How can you be so stupid? Right. But they say, oh, really? How did you? So give me an example of how you approach, let's call it a cultural American Christian. You meet them in a conversation. What's that look like?
Oh, well, I have plenty of opportunities for that because I do live in Texas and the weather's fairly good to go out and have talks. Although most people who use street epistemology don't initiate talks with strangers, nor do they talk about religion only. So we found that we can use this method for all different types of claims. However, it is fantastic, I think, personally, for exploring God claims with people. It usually starts with me introducing what it is I'm attempting to do and try to be as transparent with the conversation as possible so that they can consent and agree to doing it. Because when you start asking these questions, it could be there's implications for these questions that you're asking for the belief that the person holds. So we try to be careful that the person who's participating knows what they're getting into.
Well, what's that look like, Anthony? I mean, hey, I just wanted to ask you some questions about your faith.
I try to go a little further these days because it's more than just asking questions, if you ask me. I think we're asking very important and potentially earth-shaking questions to the foundation of people's beliefs. So I try to go a little bit further and say, I'd like to explore a claim that you think is true and you think that you have really good reasons to back it up, and explore the method that you use to verify those reasons. And we usually start with a percentage. The idea here is to get a self-assessment of where the person is in terms of their certainty that what they think is true. And we explore that. We explore to see if they can justify that to their own standard. And it's kind of amazing how many people will agree to participate in it, even though you've laid it out as bare as you possibly can.
It's kind of a subjective assessment. Like, I believe 100% the Bible is true. And then after you have a conversation, and you realize that they haven't done much thinking about their thinking in many cases. How convinced are you now? And they're like, well, I'm 40%. I mean, they're just sort of throwing numbers out. So, I mean, it's not like it's a scientific survey, but you're saying it has utility because it's revealing now that they aren't quite as convinced as they used to be. Would that be a fair representation?
It's pretty fair. The scale has a utilitarian purpose. It's a guidepost of sorts, and it is totally subjective. And it's, of course, dependent on what your conversation partner tells you. So sometimes it could be an indication that you've built some trust because now the person maybe is being a little bit more forthcoming with their true position on that confidence scale. So sometimes after a discussion, if you notice a shift, it doesn't mean that the person shifted in their confidence, but perhaps you've both brought better clarity to the position that they hold. And that still has value. If the person realizes, maybe the reasons I thought I had aren't really good enough to justify that initial level of confidence that I gave, maybe I need to look for better reasons.
Would you say that a lot of the people you engage qualify as unreasonable, at least on the position that you're discussing?
Most of the people, what does it mean to be unreasonable? So is there a specific definition that you're going with for your broadcast? Because I want to make sure I'm on. This is actually an SC type of thing.
No, it's true. It's a great question because I think we might all frame this a little bit differently. When I say unreasonable, I usually mean someone who holds a position without fully researching it and they have an emotional attachment to it rather than a logical one. I tie irrationality into this. You know, there are a lot of layers to the onion. But you're right. I mean, it's hard to really pin down unreasonable.
Yeah, because by your definition, what you described seems fairly common. That is usually the end result of an exploration where we're using street epistemology and no doubt other methods of interrogating beliefs. The realization that I can't justify this, and it is giving me some sort of it's meeting an emotional need, and I can't justify it. So, gosh, it seems like most of the beliefs that we hold that are supernatural, at least, aren't justifiable to people's own satisfaction.
Well, it has to be said, too. And you and I know that being an atheist doesn't make you reasonable. Right? I mean, people like to point fingers and say, God believer, unreasonable, illogical, insane, or whatever pejorative they throw out.
Sure.
But, we're all human beings. We're all guilty of bias and being unreasonable about a number of different things. It's hard for us sometimes to point the looking glass inward, isn't it?
That's one of the biggest challenges, I think, is to allow yourself to challenge a deeply held belief that's tied to your identity. And that's largely what we do in these SE street epistemology conversations is we want to talk about the belief that motivates you to behave a certain way. It's not so much the smaller things. We want to really get to the big things. And when you start focusing on bigger claims, then that's where I think you run into maybe more of a preponderance that you'll be discussing emotional underpinnings.
Can you give me one or maybe several of the tactics that you use to keep people off the defensive?
Well, yeah, because what we found, I suppose, is that the calmer and more relaxed and more open and honest your conversation partner is, the better the result will be, I think. The better understanding, at the very least, you're going to have. And there are certain things that I'll try to do. I try to look non-threatening. I do the version, of course, where I go out and try to flag people down. So I don't want to look scary. I did street epistemology with Aaron Ra at one point. And he was all dressed in black and had his sunglasses on and everything. And he's a pretty imposing looking individual.
Like one of the four horsemen of the apocalypse is asking you about your Christianity. I'm sure that was unique.
Well, it's interesting. Some people might be attracted to the novelty of that kind of appearance. Who knows? Yeah. But generally speaking, I try to smile. I try to make people feel comfortable. And one of the best ways maybe to do that is to really listen to them, pay attention to what's being said. And that really goes a long way. So lots of good eye contact, genuine smiling, but not fake, like just being as transparent and open as you can. And then I think that comes back to you.
One of the elements of this, though, is that you are face-to-face, eye-to-eye, person-to-person. Mm-hmm. So then the question becomes, can you really change minds on Twitter, right? On Facebook? You faced this. Do you have a perspective?
I do think it's possible, and I've had many conversations over Twitter. However, when you lose those verbal cues, the verbal ones and the nonverbal ones, the visual cues, you really lose a lot of the conversation. It's easier to forget, I think, that you're actually talking with a human who has emotions. So a lot of the times, the SE that I've seen and even participated online is a lot rougher, maybe, and doesn't seem quite as personal. And maybe that's just by the venue itself. So you can use those venues perhaps to find people that might want to do a one-on-one chat with you or something in the messaging system of Twitter, for example, or maybe you can shift over to video. But I do think it's a little bit harder to do SE. You can ask a few good questions. I try to model conversations here and there, whatever the topic du jour is. I'll try to post a conversation that I've either had with somebody or guidance for a possible conversation somebody might have if they were going to do something over text or maybe even verbally.
I don't mean in any way for this to be insulting. I'm trying to think of how else to say this.
Yeah.
How much of SE, street epistemology, is it self-gratification? I mean, do people actually come back to you and say, you helped me change my mind? Or are you having these conversations and then they drift into the ether and you never see or hear them again, and you tell yourself that you helped to change minds? And I'm not speaking to you. I'm speaking sort of in the abstract. I don't know.
Sure.
I can't think of a better way to ask the question, Anthony, but does it actually work, and how do you know?
Sure. Oh, that's a great question. So many times I do not hear back from the people that I interview, even though I'll give them a card to message me. But I do hear back from some. I would put it at 5 to 10% of the people who I speak with take the time to email me. And it's usually to thank me or maybe ask clarification on a point. I do also meet people multiple times. I intentionally went out for the last 2 years up until COVID with a prop, basically a 3-gear prop. And I would give one of the 3 pieces at the end of each conversation to inspire repeat conversations. And I was noticing changes in people's confidence levels that what they thought was true was true. And this was on a variety of different topics, from ghosts to gods to guns to gold. You name the topic, we talked about it. So it's hard to say from my anecdotal evidence that this works, but something is happening here, Seth, and I don't exactly know what it is, but people are definitely remembering the conversations. They tend to have allowed it to inspire them to keep looking deeper into the subject that we explored. And that could mean a shift in confidence one way or the other.
You mentioned a shift in confidence. Let's park right there for just a second, since I've got you. Coming out of a faith culture, doubt was a sin. Doubt was weakness. Doubt was an attack. And, when you come out of the faith and you realize what a wonderful protective mechanism doubt is. It keeps us safe. It keeps us from harm. It keeps us from being scammed. It keeps us from all kinds of calamity out there. I mean, doubt is one of the tools that I, as a believer, used in almost every other area of my life, except the most important thing in my life. And so it's interesting. This conversation style actually sort of gives people permission to doubt.
I think I'd agree with that. Doubt is one of the potential outcomes of one of these conversations, and you shouldn't be afraid to mention that to your conversation partner beforehand, because there are some cultures that have stigmatized doubt. I've had conversations with people where we didn't talk about their God belief. We talked about his stigma towards doubt. And surprisingly, or maybe not surprisingly, he ended up returning for a second conversation where we talked about his God at that point. So he was of the mindset that doubt was of the devil, I think was the quote that he used. And by the end of a 20 or 30-minute talk, he was recognizing that doubt actually had some value. But there's this one situation where I'm not permitted to doubt. Why is that? And that's where we ended that first talk. So that might be something to check out. So you can use this questioning approach of SE, street epistemology, to interrogate the confidence level people have, but sometimes it could be used to unpack concepts with people. A college-age student who has always thought that asking questions was forbidden, and then to have him through my asking questions, but he was the one that came around and realized that, no, I really should be allowed to ask questions on these things. That's growth, and it's an incredible thing to see when you experience it firsthand like that.
Somebody shows up at your door and says, hey, sign here, give me your credit card number, and you could get rich. It's our doubt that keeps us from being taken advantage of. If some stranger opens a car door and says, hey, I'll give you a lift, it's our doubt that potentially saves our lives from somebody who might be dangerous. Somebody says, here, drink this. We don't know the person. We don't know what's in the glass. We doubt that it's safe. That potentially keeps us from harm. And I like to use those types of examples to reframe doubt in the minds of the believer and remind them that actually they use doubt in a positive way all the time. They teach their kids, be skeptical, don't trust or verify, or whatever their model is. And I found utility in that. I regret actually not scheduling a whole hour with you, Anthony, because you and I could talk about street epistemology.
We can get deep into this, man, if you want.
But I mean, what I really like is that you don't start at the end zone, right? You don't go after the religion and dissect the religion itself right off the bat. You are interested in the processes by which people get there. Mm-hmm. How did you come to that position? Well, how do you know this is true? What's your confidence level? How would you verify it against a claim by a competing religion or no religion? For many people, it's the first time in their lives they have been meaningfully challenged. And you can see it in their faces on the video because they'll stop and kind of cock their head because they've always assumed it. They've always been taught it. They just decided, okay, it's true. They've never really stopped to consider why. And for a lot of people, I really think those seeds planted bear fruit later on in their lives.
Well, that's the idea, is to leave people with a pleasant experience from having had the conversation and having had areas of their belief tower, their belief structure explored and prodded in a really explorative and friendly manner. A lot of people don't regularly do that, and to have a complete stranger or maybe even somebody walk you through that can open up people's minds. We're not out there to try to convince people to come around to our point of view. We want to understand how they became convinced. Can you walk me through your steps? And people love talking about their beliefs, but they haven't really given a lot of thought to the quality of their reasons and the reliability of their methods, of their process. And that's what we focus on with these questions.
You should Google or YouTube search street epistemology. There's a ton of short-form conversations out there with people far and wide. And I think they're entertaining, they're compelling. I think they're a good teaching tool for how the rest of us can engage the culture. Anthony Magna Bosco, my friend, it's so good to talk to you. Let's try to hook up later in the year. Let's do a whole show together on this, all right?
Let's get into it. We can pull the covers way back.
Okay, it shall be done. Short break. We're going to talk more about how to reason, if possible, with unreasonable people. And we're going to get into some science with Psychology Today to talk about the brain and how reasoning even works. Our conversation continues next. My patrons get the broadcast early and they get it totally commercial free. Thanks for your support. Patreon.com/Seth Andrews. Continuing our conversation on whether or not you can reason with unreasonable people. 509, who's this?
Oh my goodness, I can't believe Hi, my name's Allie.
Hi, Allie.
So I woke up this morning to a call from my sister, and my whole entire family is pretty much really religious. And I came out maybe 5 or 6 years ago as an atheist, and I've kind of been, what's the word I'm looking for? I'm not really included in the family gatherings anymore, which is totally okay. But my brother came out as gay last year. And as you can imagine, my family was less than welcoming. And when I woke up this morning, my sister called me, and she won't let me see her children because I refuse to disown my brother as well. And my boyfriend came in and was talking to me, and he's like, you know, you're wasting your time trying to reason with her. And I open up your podcast, and here you are talking about whether it's a waste of time to try to reason with unreasonable people. And I really struggle with it because it's hard for me to accept that she wants nothing to do with him. I mean, he's still the same person. He's still her brother, blah, blah, blah. But it's really hard for me to overlook that or not let that bother me or me not want to engage. Do you know what I mean?
Well, let me advise you as a friend that it's just fine if it bothers you. It's just fine if it makes you angry. It's just fine if you resist these impositions and crazy, even discriminatory rules that they put in place, these qualifiers for a connection to him or to you. I mean, I think anger, resentment, disappointment, these are, I think, proper responses. You should allow yourself to feel that. So that's my first piece of advice to you, because, I mean, I think it should be something that grieves all moral creatures. What a waste, right? Because I'm guessing he's a beautiful guy, right?
I mean, he's genuinely the nicest and most sincere and loyal and loving and compassionate person I've ever met in my whole life. And I just want to rip her stupid book up and tell her that people are more important than the pages in this fairy tale. But luckily, my brother doesn't struggle with it. He doesn't really care how she feels because he's so confident in himself and who he is and just owning who he is that he doesn't really let it get to him. But me, on the other hand, I feel protective, and I feel like I have to protect him. Even though he doesn't need to be protected, I still just feel the urge to defend him.
That says so much about you, right? You want to be his advocate, and you feel real grief about the way he's being treated. And I share your frustration. Look, my best friend came out as gay, and to hear a few members of my core family talk about non-heterosexuals, it's like they're radioactive. And the reason they think that he's radioactive is because they believe in a book that they can't remotely sustain or source or defend, the book that's filled with giants and 1,000-year-old people and talking animals and stuff like that. And right, you and I feel the same way. We just want to reach over and just shake them and say, wake up, there's a much better world right over here.
Yeah, absolutely. When I was a believer, I remember it was a fear. It was just fear-based. I would scroll through Facebook and I would see posts that were quote-unquote ungodly or a post about being an atheist, and I would read it in my head. And part of me would be like, does he know? Does he know that I just read that in my head? Am I going to be in trouble for that? It's all fear. It's all fear. And one of the few things that I'll ever remember about my grandpa, who before I grew up thought was an incredible man. I was sadly disappointed when I became an adult and I really realized what kind of a person he was. But this is before my brother came out, and we were sitting at the kitchen table and we were talking, and he was telling me how he went to Walmart and he was with my grandma, and they walked into the store, and a gay couple walked out holding hands, and my grandpa patted his pockets like he was looking for his gun, and then he put his hands up and he's like, but I didn't have it. And then my brother told me that he was gay, and I just worried for him. I worried for him because I worry about his safety more than anything now. Yeah. It's just hard. Well, and I tried to engage with Grandpa afterwards. I tried to explain to him that, because one of his defenses was homosexuality is not natural. Well, the definition of natural is to occur in nature. And there are hundreds of species who participate in homosexual activities, not even just the sex part of it, but the relationship part of it. And he shut me down, and he says, nope, that's not true. And I realized I can't argue with him about it. His cognitive dissonance won't allow him to process this new information because it so threatens everything that he believes in. And so when it comes to reasoning with him, I don't bother. I don't think anything I say is going to change it.
You do have to do that cost benefit. And I think you also have to protect yourself and realize that your time and your mind and your heart are valuable, right? What does this cost you when you go in and engage and you leave and, your heart is on the floor and you are absolutely distraught and upset and nothing has been gained. In fact, maybe things are even worse. You got to protect yourself. I mean, you feel that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why my boyfriend was like, just don't even bother. Just don't even bother explaining why you feel the way you feel or trying to convince them to feel a different way. And I'm honestly considering just biting the bullet and cutting my sister off the way that she cut my brother off. And it's sad because it means I won't get to have a relationship with my nieces and nephews because my sister's the kind of person who will use her children as a weapon. But those kids are going to grow up someday. And they're going to seek me out. And part of me just feels like I should just wait for that.
Well, again, I'm not a professional, but let me just say one more thing, okay? These impositions and restrictions and conditions were put in place by them, right? So it's not your fault. Yeah. It's not my desire that you end up sort of othered from your family and you end up taking a hard line that cost you a relationship. But if it does, if those lines of acceptance are in place, it's because they drew them. They forced your hand. Yeah. And you took the path of love. Natalie's got a shirt. I love it when she wears it. It just says love wins. And I'm just like, you want love to win. You love your brother. You want everyone to see past their labels and all this discriminatory bullshit and realize that really love wins. And I'll encourage you with this. I think there will never be a shortage of bigots in this world, but I think that you are the future. I think the way that you approach your brother and the way you approach humanity will more and more and more be the norm in this country in the months, years, decades ahead. And the stand you take for your brother and the love you show him now, I think represents what we will be more like. And I'm proud to know you. And I got your back, and so does everybody in the chat, and I'm sure a bunch of people listening in the audience. We feel you. We love you. We love your brother. Be the authentic self you deserve to be. And if there is some hard line that ends up being drawn, they forced you to do it. Fair enough?
Fair enough. Thank you so much for taking my call and for just letting me vent. And thank you, everyone, for listening. And, thank you so much, Seth. Man, it's really nice to have your support and thank you so much.
Hey, love wins, right? Love wins.
Every time. Every time.
I appreciate you so much. You take care.
Thank you, Seth. You too.
Bye-bye. Let's see. 810. Hi. Who's this?
This is Johnny calling in from Michigan.
Johnny, what's up?
I just wanted to throw in my little experience, or just to answer the question of the show about can you reason with the unreasonable, I'm going to say no. I was a Christian myself for like 20 years. Preacher's son, studied the Bible. I mean, I've probably read it through. I stopped counting after 20 times. I mean, I was really, really deep into it, and you couldn't convince me of anything. One of the things that the Bible is really heavy on, especially in the New Testament, Paul talks about casting down imaginations and thoughts that exhaust itself against the knowledge of Christ. So I was real heavy on that. Like, you couldn't tell me anything outside of the Bible. If you gave me any information outside of the Bible, like evolution, you instantly believed that this was from the devil, and you just completely shut your mind off to it. My whole life was Genesis through Revelation. So it actually took tragedy in my life and unanswered prayer to get me to come and open my mind up to other ideas. And I think ultimately that's what's going to have to happen to people that are in religion is something's going to have to happen to them where their God really fails them for them to really see like, oh, okay, this is not working out. And so that's kind of been my journey for the last 3 years. Now when I talk to Christians now, it's like I can see myself in them. You can't get through to them because they got a verse for everything. So
I've heard that story a lot, something major happened to rattle somebody's cage, and maybe there were some outside influences, but the desire to change had to begin from within. I totally get that. Thank you so much for the call, my friend. Thanks for being a part of the conversation.
Thank you for taking the call. You have a good one.
Take care. Some people, a crisis like that would actually draw them deeper into a faith. People are so complex, we want to put them in a cookie cutter. We want to say this sort of one-size-fits-all problem or solution, right? We want to speak about everybody in the same way. But I know people who, if they had a death in the family, they might panic. They might be reminded of the mortality, this finite existence on this planet, and maybe draw deeper into the idea of a reunion with the person that they lost, or maybe they're seeking deeper meaning. Maybe they desperately want to believe that there's a puppeteer and all this is part of a larger plan, pain in this life and paradise in the next. But I do hear a lot of people who say that there was a cage-rattling event that sort of caused the fog to clear for them. And that's where the journey started. Let's get some science on minds and how to change them. This is an article in Psychology Today by Dr. Denise Cummins. It's called How to Get People to Change Their Minds. As the saying goes, all the world is mad except for me and thee, and I'm not too sure of thee. This is the reaction many of us have when people express opinions that differ markedly from our own. And then, of course, we try to change their minds. If we were all entirely rational, then our beliefs would be grounded in logic and evidence, and changing our beliefs would simply be a matter of presenting a logical argument backed up by objective evidence. In fact, this is how we educate students to think critically. It's how our politicians and lawmakers debate issues. Yet, this is rarely effective. Consider this study by Lord, Ross, and Lepner, 1979, which used a very realistic procedure to examine whether logic and evidence lead people to change their minds. People supporting and opposing capital punishment were asked to read 2 studies, one that confirmed and one that disconfirmed their existing beliefs about the death penalty. The studies were fictional, but were described as actual published research. They were then asked of each study, has this study changed the way you feel toward capital punishment? And has this study changed your beliefs about the deterrent efficacy of the death penalty? Then they were given summaries of several prominent criticisms of the study and the author's rebuttals to the criticisms. The results? The 2 groups became more certain of their original position, and as a result, the groups became more polarized in their beliefs. Why? Because people are likely to examine relevant evidence in a biased manner. accepting evidence that is consistent with their views without further scrutiny, while subjecting evidence that contradicts their views to intense scrutiny. Researchers at Cornell University recently took a different approach to the question of how to get people to change their mind. They analyzed social media. Change My View is an active Reddit community of over 200,000 members on Reddit that allows users to present their opinions and to invite others to contest them. If the ensuing discussion causes them to change their minds, they acknowledge that they've changed their minds and explain what in particular it was that they found persuasive. Some of the opinions posted included, people don't define who they are, their genetics and environment do. Zoos are immoral, and I think the vast majority of Bernie supporters are selfish and ill-informed. That last one received over 1,000 comments in one day. The researchers analyzed a number of factors, including the number of people who responded, the order in which their responses occurred in the discussion, and how the responses were worded. Some of the results jibed with common sense. Persuasive arguments tended to use calm words rather than emotional words, such as terrorist, or dominant words that imply control, such as completion. They tended to be longer, including greater numbers of sentences and paragraphs. In other words, one-liners and rants rarely persuade people. It was also heartening to find that posts containing citation links to external sites were more persuasive. So evidence does seem to play a role in changing minds. Original posters who use the word I rather than we when describing their opinion tend to be more open to persuasion, as are those who avoid using dominant, emotional, or superlative words like worst and dumbest. Other results were more surprising. Words that are emotionally neutral or slightly downbeat are more persuasive than upbeat, happy words. Using words that are different from the ones used by the original poster is more effective than using the same words. The researchers interpreted this to mean that different words signal a different point of view. Hedging language, such as "it could be the case," is usually labeled weak because it signals uncertainty. Yet arguments containing such language were, surprisingly, more persuasive than those without. The researchers suggest that this is because they may make an argument easier to accept by softening its tone. In other words, people are not open to persuasion when they feel they are being bulldozed, conquered, proved wrong, or dominated by their opponent. Arguments presented early in the thread are more likely to persuade than those presented later, and that was true regardless of the expertise of the responder. In fact, the first two challengers were 3 times more likely to succeed at persuading than the 10th challenger. In back-and-forth dialogues between the original poster and a responder, the results were crystal clear. If you haven't persuaded the person by the 4th round, you never will. Initial analysis indicated that the greater number of challengers, the higher the likelihood of success in changing the original poster's mind. But subsequent analyses indicated single challenger threads consistently outperformed multiple challenger threads in terms of conversion rate. According to the authors, this observation suggests that the sheer number of challengers is not necessarily associated with higher chances of conversion. And before I finish the article, I'm going to just interject something. I also think that this sort of piling on produces a doubling down or defensive posture. This notion, this feeling that someone is being attacked, because if they're swarmed all of a sudden, they're just going to sort of retreat into themselves. So I think that makes sense that they might be more open if they are engaged in just a one-on-one exchange instead of feeling like it's them against the mob. Back to the article, it says, perhaps the most interesting outcome and least surprising from an educator's viewpoint is that using specific examples is a powerful persuasion technique. One picture is worth 1,000 words, and one example is worth an hour of lecture. I was disappointed to find, however, that the researchers did not investigate one type of specific example that's perhaps the most persuasive of all, and that is analogy and metaphor. As I said in a previous post, when Federal Reserve Chief Ben Bernanke appeared on the TV news show 60 Minutes to persuade us to bail out the banking system, he didn't bother with charts, figures, or lengthy argument. Instead, he used something more powerful, analogy and metaphor. Imagine, he explained, that you have an irresponsible neighbor who smokes in bed and sets fire to his house. Should you call the fire department, or should you simply walk away and let him face the consequences of his actions? What if your house, indeed all the houses in the entire neighborhood, are also made of wood? We all agree, he argued, that under those circumstances we should focus on putting out the fire first. Then we can turn to the issues of assigning blame or punishment, rewriting the fire code, and putting fail-safes in place. This was a powerful analogy. It communicated the clear and present danger to the economy and the urgency of implementing his proposed solution. Lawyers use analogies frequently to draw parallels between an undecided case and a case that has already been decided, a precedent. Some legal scholars, such as Lloyd Weinreb, go so far as to argue that without analogy, a court's decision is incomplete. It is that important in explaining and justifying legal arguments. And she's got some other writings. Dr. Denise Cummins is a research psychologist. She's also author of Good Thinking, 7 Powerful Ideas That Influence the Way We Think. And I thought it was a fascinating article. And I think she's got some salient points there. I mean, how many times have we seen an engagement online and somebody is like, "You're an idiot. I can't believe you're so stupid as to hold this position," right? And what's that supposed to accomplish? It's certainly not language that changes minds. I've long been a fan of using the word I instead of you, certainly in a conversation, instead of saying, well, you're wrong and you need to change your mind and you've got bad information. I prefer to say something along the lines of, I have found some information, or I changed my own mind on this very same subject years ago, and here's what made me reevaluate, right? It sort of takes the targeting, the crosshairs off of the interlocutor, and it makes them feel more safe during the exchange. I think it makes sense to give the other person just a little bit of room to maneuver. You know, it could be the case. It's certainly possible, or the evidence strongly suggests, right? Instead of speaking in declaratives, I think that makes a lot of sense. I don't think that makes us weak if we're using it as a tool to foster conversation and to make sure that conversation continues without somebody shutting down and running away. I'm not a fan of this sort of social media mob rule, which really kind of comes off a little bit like an argument from popularity, right? Because the more we overwhelm them with numbers, this is supposed to be convincing. The more people call them idiots and stupid, the more they will realize they're an idiot and stupid. I don't think that's remotely effective. In fact, often it feeds a persecution narrative and telling stories. Analogy and metaphor. These are things that human beings can relate to and understand. Really good stuff. Coming up next, I've got a couple of friends and activists, Chris Shelton and Kimberly Stover. We're going to talk to them because they have been posting about, as atheist activists, what are we getting wrong when we address or engage religious people? I'm going to get their perspective, and I'm going to finish with a hugely compelling piece from none other than the Oatmeal. It's just so freaking good. I'm going to read it to you on the show. Much more to come after this. Next up, I wanted to bring in a couple of activists and friends who have been speaking generously and with fairness about religious people. Both came out of high control religions, and so I sort of wanted to talk to them both at the same time. Chris Shelton, how you doing, brother?
I'm doing good. Hey, how you doing, Seth?
I'm well. I've also got Kimberly Stover. Kimberly and I spoke last year as she told her story about sort of escaping evangelicalism. Hi, Kimberly.
Hi, Seth. How are you?
I'm good. Let's talk to you first. Real fast, for those who didn't hear our conversation last year, in a nutshell, what did you come out of?
I came out of a high-demand religion. It was evangelical Christianity.
Like a literal Bible and women are subservient
Yes.
to men kind of thing? Or
Yes, it was independent fundamental Baptist, and the Bible was literal truth.
and a real heaven and a literal hell.
A literal hell where, we're going to burn forever and ever, and not a drop of water would cool our tongue.
Chris Shelton, speaking of burning, you come out of the cult that talks about exploding hydrogen bombs that are supposed to kill killing the Thetans that were being chased here by Xenu? I don't know. Am I close on that, Chris?
Oh yeah, full on interstellar genocide.
Okay.
That was 76 million years ago.
We have all been having conversations with and about religious people. And we know the frustration that comes, the brick wall thing, right? You look at them straight in the eye and you're like, I came out of this. Let me give you my perspective. This is destructive stuff. It makes no sense. You'll have a better life without it, right? We want to just sort of grab them by the shoulders and physically pull them out of a high control cult. And yet it doesn't really work that way.
It's true. And I think that people will get this most quickly if we turn it on them and say, look, you have deeply held beliefs. What would you think if somebody came along and just told you out of the blue one day, they all suck, they're horrible, they're destructive, you're thinking bad thoughts? You would obviously defend yourself. You'd think, wait a minute, what are you talking about, right? I think these things for very good reasons. How dare you say that to me? So it easily goes every direction. We are just defensive creatures, and it's our nature to want to be right. So the point is that it's not a cult-specific thing to double down or defend your beliefs or give you a stone face if you're challenging them. That's just being human. And what we miss when we're trying these full-on assaults is we miss the fact that deeply held beliefs are not like other ideas. They're not the same order as, what do you want for dinner? A deeply held belief is something that is the view that that affects the person's entire worldview. It's not the sort of thing that was created in one day or in one conversation. It's not going to be torn down or deconstructed in one day or one conversation. People need tolerance, compassion, and understanding in order to consider talking about their deeply held beliefs in a very serious way. And if you don't deliver that to them, they're not going to respect you or the conversation any more than you would respect them for coming at you.
Kim, the theme of our conversation is trying to reason with unreasonable people. You weren't less intelligent when you were a devout evangelical. Would you agree?
No, I wouldn't agree with that. I was scared and terrified to really listen to my brain and what it was telling me. And I did that. But at the same time, when you challenge the narrative at all, you're demonized. You're told not to be deceived. You're told not to lean onto your own understanding. So there's just a brick wall growing up the entire time. You're not able to really question the things that don't make sense.
So one of these high and mighty types on Twitter comes at you and says, what kind of idiot could believe that stuff for so long? They must be defective in some way. And we've all heard these types of things, right? Religion is a mental illness. What a tragic way to frame it. I mean, Kim, what are your thoughts when you hear that kind of thing?
I think the majority of these types of religious people are victims of a massive misinformation campaign that's been going on for centuries. So it's generational. It goes deep into the psyche. And they're not suffering from mental illness. They're victims of an attack on their own brain.
But when you were being unreasonable, could someone have reasoned with you at that time?
No, because I felt such pressure to defend my God. So I did have a friend that deconstructed before I did, and I tried to get her back by saying, well, you can't look at those kind of Christians. They're not real Christians. I did the whole fake Christian thing to try to get her back because I felt it was my responsibility to get her back to Jesus. And you couldn't have reasoned with me at that time, but what she did by sharing things on Facebook and whatnot, she planted seeds of doubt in my mind. So it wasn't all for nothing. But at the time that she was deconstructing, you couldn't have told me any different.
Now, I think this is interesting because when we talk about street epistemology and discussions, and I am convinced that people change their minds from a position of safety in almost all cases. Mm-hmm. So, Kim, you were able to sort of watch without feeling personally attacked. You were watching these posts and the comments and your friend's deconstruction. And you were able to sort of stand in the periphery and sort of see it all play out as a spectator. So in that way, you were able to watch without feeling like they were coming after you personally. Is that an accurate way to frame it?
Correct. And I actually really cared for this person because she was a church friend that was part of the Gothard cult. I knew intimate details about her childhood. And so that made me have compassion for her experience and really try to understand where she's coming from.
Bill Gothard. Boy, that's a memory. Kim, they brought us, I was in 6th grade, they brought us into a room and they played a bunch of albums backwards and told us that Satan was everywhere and it was all part of this Gothard fear cult. It was rooted in the Bible. Chris, same thing for you, right? You weren't an idiot whenever you were a believer in Scientology. Your IQ did not change from then to now. Could someone have reasoned with you?
Yes, but only under certain conditions. And that's what I keep stressing with people is that it's not a matter of it's an impossible task, but it's a task that requires a very different approach from how people do it on social media.
So what's the approach? I mean, what do you see out there that drives you crazy, and what do we need more of from your perspective?
I think that what drives me crazy is the antagonism, the venting, the people, especially in the ex-believer or the ex-theist, atheist world, you find a lot of people who are experiencing their own brand of catharsis. So it's understandable that they want to get stuff off their chest, they want to push back, they want to react, they want to, let people know because they're so upset about what happened to them. And that's good for them and their catharsis, but let's not mistake that for the process of deconverting others or changing people's minds or even getting information into their heads. We tend to kind of, as ex-members, I know I have certainly gone down some very enthusiastically insulting rabbit holes, trying to take on theists or take on active Scientologists, etc. And what I've come to learn is that is completely the wrong approach because what you do when you attack is you create the fight or flight mechanism in them that forces them to mentally double down on the belief, and it actually becomes stronger. So what you're trying to do and what you're actually doing are two different things. And the only way I've ever found success, and I have done interventions, and I have done one-on-ones with people, and I've had deep, honest conversations with people who have radically different beliefs from me. And the only way I have ever gotten them to start considering changing their minds or considering a different point of view is if I can get them to invite me. The analogy I use is the thought fortress. If they can invite me into their thought fortress, so I'm not just battering at the walls that they've constructed with their beliefs. And also, by the way, with the counter-arguments that their religion furnishes them to fight us apostates or bad people. So it's not like they come at it unprepared either.
You're saying that you find sort of a way to, I don't know, at least in the abstract, get someone to invite you into their living room. So they feel like at least they're operating a little bit on their own terms.
You are catching that exactly right.
All right.
In other words, you respect them as a human being. Even if you don't respect anything about what they think, you respect their humanity and their right to think it. And if they get that from you, they open up like a flower. It's the most beautiful thing, and you can have an actual conversation.
I have had my moments of snark, and honestly, I still think some people have it coming. When I see Pastor Greg Locke and Dinesh D'Souza and Marjorie Taylor Greene, I mean, okay. But in this context, I guess I'm talking about the everyday believer, those people that we encounter. And I know, Kim, you're listening to this. What are your thoughts on what we're discussing?
I agree with what Chris is saying, and I also want to add it's easier to do this sort of street epistemology that we need to do with people that are not in our family. it's very difficult for them to listen to what we're saying because there's automatically, the defenses come up even stronger. And I've made that mistake, and it's caused them to double down even more.
No, you and I have both made that mistake. I don't know how. I had years and years worth of conversations, and I think part of the family thing is they're not operating from a point of discussion. You're the prodigal. They're in rescue mode. They got to fix you.
Right, and it's impossible. I keep having the internal dialogue telling me, just stop, Kim. Just stop. It's a brick wall. Just stop it, stop it, stop it. And I haven't learned that lesson yet because I'm so frustrated. But I find it easier to ask the questions and have compassion for people that are, one, outside of my religion. So if I talk to Jehovah's Witness, I find it easier. If I talk to Mormons, I find it easier than if I'm talking to evangelical Christians.
Before I move on, do either of you or both of you have any sort of final thoughts on tactics and approaches trying to reason with people who seem to us in many ways unreasonable?
My advice would be to get really good at street epistemology and learn the tactics, because it's a skill that I believe everybody needs to get better at right now.
Use questions, leave the burden of proof on them. For many of these people, it's perhaps the first time they've actually been asked to defend a position in any meaningful way. Has that been your experience?
Yeah, they're like, what? What are you coming at me with this for? How can you not believe what I'm believing? It's obvious. You're the one that's a sheeple. You're the one that's victims of misinformation. So you need to be able to have a conversation with these people without getting emotional, because they truly believe what they're saying. When I hear somebody I know telling me that there's microchips in the vaccine or that the vaccine is going to alter their DNA, it is the same feeling inside of me that I got when I listened to a person that was a friend of mine when they were having psychosis from a meth-induced state. So they're saying the same kind of paranoid, weird stuff, but they truly believe that. So my response to my friend that was having a meth-induced psychosis was, I had so much compassion. Wow, that must be really scary for you. I think it's the same kind of mentality that people that are believing these vaccine narratives are having. Deep down, they have to be terrified of the demonic New World Order.
And we grieve for the lives of fear that they live and see them as human beings who have been damaged, likely by family and culture, right?
Yep.
Chris, you tweeted something. Let me just read this real fast, because you always speak about cults. You said, if someone breaks into your house and takes all your stuff, it's illegal. If someone hacks your computer and deletes your files, it's illegal. If someone hacks your mind and destroys your life, that's your fault. This is how far off we are in recognizing coercive control. Many of these people, they didn't really have it shot, right? I mean, from their earliest memories, they were not given a chance. That's your message, right?
That's exactly it. And dealing with this requires letting go of your ego a bit and making it about them, not about you. If I could give general advice, if I could give attitude advice, because there's so many methods. There are so many ways of communicating with people and introducing ideas to them that it's almost, I could think of 20 right off the top of my head, right? So instead, I want to say maybe, look, the attitude that underlies how you approach this and how you approach them is everything. You can do all the right things and have the wrong attitude and fail miserably at this.
Chris Shelton and Kimberly Stover, I knew you two would have a lot of good stuff for this particular discussion. I'm honored that you're part of it, and you guys keep kicking out there, okay?
Awesome. Thanks,
Thank you.
There is a series, I don't know if you call it a graphic novel or a series of illustrations or an illustrated story by the Oatmeal. Now, this is a visual piece. My podcast listeners won't be able to see this, but you need to Google it. Google the Oatmeal. You're not going to believe what I'm about to tell you. I'll read it for you here. You're not going to believe what I'm about to tell you. I'm going to tell you some things. You're not going to believe these things I tell you, and that's okay. You have good reason not to. But I need you to keep listening regardless of what you believe. I don't care if you're liberal, conservative, or somewhere in between. I don't care if you're a cat person, a dog person, or a tarantula person, morning person or night owl, iPhone or Android, Coke or Pepsi. I don't care. All I care about is that you read this to the end. Sound good? Then let's begin. You may have heard that George Washington had wooden teeth. He lost most of his teeth in his 20s and had a set of dentures made out of wood. It's a disturbing visual. The founding father, commander-in-chief, and first president of the United States click-clacking his way through a ham sandwich. Except it isn't true. In 2005, at the National Museum of Dentistry in Baltimore, laser scans were performed on Washington's 200-year-old dentures and found them to be made of gold, lead, hippopotamus ivory, horse, and donkey teeth. His mouth was a petting zoo of nightmares. Upon learning this information, I want to ask you something. How did it feel to learn this new fact about George Washington's teeth? I stated a thing. I provided evidence of that thing, and presumably you now believe in the thing I stated. Presumably, your belief in the composition of George Washington's teeth has changed with little or no friction. Presumably, the next time you're at a party and George Washington's teeth come up in conversation, you're going to proudly impart this newfound knowledge to your fellow partygoers. Yes? Terrific. Let's continue. What if I told you George Washington had another set of false teeth? What if I told you this other set wasn't made from wood, ivory, or any of the aforementioned materials? What if I told you it was made from the teeth of slaves? Now, let's try this again. How did it feel to learn this fact about George Washington? Any more of that friction I mentioned earlier? Before we go any further, allow me to reiterate I'm not here to convince you that George Washington was a bad person. I could go through all my cited sources and cherry-pick arguments that either deify or demonize George Washington. I could paint a portrait of a monster. I could exonerate a patriot. But as I said before, I don't care. It's not the point. The point is to give you an emotional barometer of how you feel when presented with new ideas. Because you may have noticed that the first fact about George Washington's teeth was rather easy to accept. I would wager that when I told you the first fact, you accepted it without question. But when I told you the second fact, you immediately checked my sources and are now furiously composing an informed yet incendiary retort, which you will boldly deliver to me in the form of a sour, blustering Facebook comment. And that's okay. That's all part of it. Let me try a few more. Napoleon Bonaparte was not short. He was 5'7", which was taller than the average Frenchman of the time. Thomas Crapper did not invent the flush toilet, nor did the word crap come about because of his name. Houseflies live for about a month, not 24 hours. Humans don't explode in a vacuum, nor do we boil. We just pass out from lack of oxygen, and then we die. Again, as you read these facts, take stock of how you feel. I'm guessing you softened to the last few fairly easily. Let's try a few more and we're done. There is zero evidence that Jesus Christ was born on December the 25th. The Pledge of Allegiance was written by a socialist. 6 of the 7 justices who voted in favor of Roe v. Wade were Republican appointed. How'd those last 3 feel? Depending on your beliefs, I'm guessing it may have put some of you about here, and it's got a thermometer that's going well up near the top. At the very least, you can concede that it felt different to hear those statements compared to the ones about Napoleon or houseflies. Yes? But why? Why do we easily soften to some ideas but not to others? Why do we gnash our teeth when presented with evidence counter to our beliefs? Why do we not only ignore this evidence but dig our heels in deeper and believe more strongly in the opposing argument? Why would providing more evidence make someone less likely to believe in an idea? It seems backwards and batshit fucking bonkers to me. It turns out batshit fucking bonkers has a name in the world of neuroscience. It's called the Backfire Effect, and it's a well-documented psychological behavior. A few years ago, at the University of Southern California's Brain and Creativity Institute, a study was conducted where participants were placed into an MRI machine. Once inside, they were presented with counter-arguments to strongly held political beliefs. A few examples: laws restricting gun ownership should be made more restrictive. Gay marriage should not be legalized. As participants were read these counter-arguments, various parts of their brains were scanned for activity. What the study revealed was that the same part of the brain that responds to a physical threat responds to an intellectual one. This area of the brain is known as the amygdala, and it's the emotional core of your mind. Unfortunately, it makes us biologically wired to react to threatening information the same way we'd react to being attacked by a predator. From an evolutionary standpoint, it makes sense. If you were a caveman and another caveman threw a boulder at your head, you wouldn't react by logically debating the pros and cons of getting brained. Core beliefs are the beliefs which people cherish the most deeply. They usually develop from childhood and are compounded by life experiences. Core beliefs are inflexible, rigid, and incredibly sensitive to being challenged. When I told you that George Washington's dentures were made from animal bones, it probably didn't ruffle many feathers, but when I suggested they were made from slave teeth, I'm guessing it caused strife with some of you. There are obvious cultural reasons for this. Slavery is a sensitive, hot-button issue. But there are biological reasons as well. The amygdala of your brain is screaming, battle stations. Some of you may have held a worldview that George Washington was a patriot and a hero. By presenting negative information about him, it challenged that worldview. Your brain loves consistency. It builds a worldview like we build a house. It has a foundation and a frame and windows and doors, and it knows exactly how everything fits together. If a new piece is introduced and it doesn't fit, the whole house falls apart. Your brain protects you by rejecting that piece. It then builds a fence and a moat and refuses to let in any visitors. This is why we have the backfire effect. It's a biological way of protecting a worldview. Just remember that your worldview isn't a perfect house that was built to last forever. It's a cheap condo, and over time, most of it will turn to shit. So what do we do about this? Some of you have probably been nodding along in agreement, waiting for me to deliver a series of clever, combative ways to offset the backfire effect. The disappointing truth is that I don't have much advice for you. I don't have a way to change the behavior of 7.5 billion people carrying their beliefs around like precious gems wrapped in hand grenades. Sure, there are ways of changing people's minds that are more effective than others, but ultimately they all fall short. This is compounded by the internet, where anything can be cited as a source, and every disagreement degrades into a room full of orangutans throwing feces at one another. The best I can do is make you aware of it, so you can identify the backfire effect in your own brain, which isn't easy. The mind can't separate the emotional cortex from the logical one, and one could argue that this emotional underbelly is what makes us human. but I would argue that it's also what makes us animals. I sometimes pretend the amygdala of my brain is in my pinky toe. When a core belief is challenged, I imagine it yelling insane things at me. I let it yell. I let it have its moment. I let the emotional cortex fight its little fight. And then I listen and I change. Because this universe of ours is so achingly beautiful, and we're all in it together. We're all going in the same direction. I'm not here to take control of the wheel or to tell you what to believe. I'm just here to tell you that it's okay to stop, to listen, to change. This is from a series of illustrations and a story written as well by The Oatmeal, the comic inspired by a 3-part series on the Backfire Effect from the You Are Not So Smart podcast. Again, this is worth a Google. That's really good, isn't it? It's fun to read. I guess at the end of the day, the lesson is keep talking, because how else are we going to change the world, right? And if some of us were rescued, maybe there's hope for someone else. Have a wonderful week. I'll see you back here next time. Take care.
Follow The Thinking Atheist on Facebook and Twitter. For a complete archive of podcasts and videos, products like mugs and t-shirts featuring the Thinking Atheist logo, links to atheist pages and resources, and details on upcoming Free Thought events and conventions, log on to our website, thethinkingatheist.com.